Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Leto Anor, who says, "Hey Steve, okay, so that happened, meaning French President Emmanuel Macron offers refuge to American climate scientists. Thoughts?" Yeah, I should have been a climate scientist. I just missed my ticket out of here. More broadly, though, good for him. Good for France. Good for France, and specifically good for their new president, President Macron, stepping up and making some effort at least to fill the void that is being left by the United States on the world stage during the Trump presidency. Donald Trump has made it very clear that he doesn't give a shit about the rest of the world. All he cares about is what he perceives to be the interests of the United States. And I suppose he imagines that the interests of the United States can be looked after completely separate from the rest of the global community. And that's what he's going with. That's why he is pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, because he says it's bad for America. Climate change is bad for the entire world, including America. So President Macron steps up and says, hey, you know what? Climate scientists, engineers, people who are responsible Americans, come to France. We will be your second homeland. Come here and work with us, and we will work together as a community to help make the world a better place. And he said it's up to all of us to make our planet great again, to which Trump responded on Twitter passive-aggressively, petulantly, "Make America great again." Okay. Haven't heard that one before, Mr. President. Yeah, good for Macron. Good for him. And like I say, I wish I was a climate scientist. I would totally take him up on his offer. I would go immediately. Another Volvox fan. What do you think of people like me who are quite pro-feminist in internet terms, i.e. I concede feminist points that I consider correct and try to understand when feminists make a point, but neither identify as one or accept feminism as the most urgent of fights, prioritizing various other issues, in my case, anti-racism and climate activism? Oh, I have no problem with that. I've said before in this series, I think just a couple of weeks ago, that you can't really tell people what their priorities should be in terms of their activism. I mean, if you feel more drawn to anti-racist activism or anti-climate change activism, then I say more power to you, you know, and whereas someone else might be more moved to focus on gender equality and feminism, and more power to them. We don't all have to focus on exactly the same thing. We don't all have to all agree in unison that this is the most important fight, and therefore we must all fight this fight first, and then when that fight has been won, then we can move on to the next item on the list. That's not the way it works. There are billions and billions of us. We can multitask as a species. There's no rule that says, well, if you don't make feminism your #1 priority, then you're not a good person, or you know, you're not a good feminist, or you're holding people back. I don't personally believe that. I think if you feel compelled to help with a social justice group, with a social justice movement, or a pro-science movement, a pro-education movement, whatever, then you should put your energy toward what you have a passion for, or what you think you have the skill set to help with. You know, I think that's the most that we can expect from any of us. And I think, I mean, I personally support you doing that 100%. And I don't think that you certainly don't lose any points with me because you choose to focus on climate activism or racism activism as opposed to feminism. Not at all. Matt Machado. Hey Steve, are there any ideas or beliefs you used to have but now are embarrassed about? For example, when I was much younger, I used to be into New Age stuff. I had some healing crystals and tarot cards, as well as a book on tarot spells. Now I'm so embarrassed I hate to admit it, even to strangers on the internet. Oh yeah, I was never really into New Age stuff or tarot cards, but I'll give you two things that I was into. The first is talking to the dead, like John Edward, you know, psychic crossing over, talking to the dead stuff. I actually used to believe that. Or at least I really, really wanted it to be true so much. I was well past my Christian phase at that point, but I was still in my, well, I really, really want there to be an afterlife because I'm scared shitless of dying phase. So I sort of latched onto that. The other thing is the Bible code. And again, this happened earlier than that. This happened when I was a teenager, but I was past my Christian phase. I was into my sort of deistic, just generic belief in some kind of God phase. And I was still open to the possibility that even though the Bible wouldn't literally be true and Christianity was not the true religion to the exclusion of all others, there still might have been something to divine revelation or divine inspiration. There might have been some true element to the divine, the claimed divine aspect of Scripture. And when I learned about the Bible code, again, I was fascinated by it, and I was very credulous about it at first, because the first people I ever heard talking about it were people on Trinity Broadcasting Network who were saying, hey, this is real and there's something to this. And when that's the first message that you get about something, your brain naturally sort of goes, oh, maybe this is real and there's something to this. Y2K, do you think global inequality is often neglected by progressives like Bernie Sanders in favor of domestic inequality? What is the best strategy for reducing global inequality? What are your views on foreign aid, global governance, and using tariffs as a weapon to improve worker conditions around the world? Well, I am not enough of an economist or a political scientist to be able to weigh in with any kind of informed opinion about whether or not tariffs are useful. But I will say in general, I mean, I think it's a little unfair to say that any domestic politician focuses more on domestic problems than international problems. You're naturally going to focus on issues that directly relate to that region, whatever region you're running to represent or to govern. But I do think that the United States government and the United States just as a country in general has a very important role to play. And I think the best thing that the United States can do is to try to set an example, advocate and enact policies here that would help address inequality globally, like by instituting a living wage, by instituting a more progressive income tax, a stronger, more secure social safety net. And we can show, hey, look, we're a global leader. We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We've done all of these things here in our society. It's helped our problems. Maybe you should consider instituting these reforms in your country as well. Which, by the way, is something that we're really terrible at here in the United States. We never do that. We should do that with using other countries as an example, and we very rarely, if ever, do that. Other countries have much more sane policies about gun regulation, for example. They do not have nearly the problem we have in the United States with gun violence. There are other countries all around the world that we could use as models for our policy. We could look at them and say, oh, what they're doing seems to be working a lot better than what we're doing. Maybe we should try what they're doing for a while. We never do that. So we should start doing that too. I just want to make that clear before I move on to the next question. We should be a role model for how other people should maybe try to address their problems, but we should also allow countries who are doing a better job than we are of handling problems be role models for us as well. Becca Hawkins. Hi, Steve. I rediscovered an atheist YouTuber I used to watch back in the day named Edward Current, who used to produce excellent satire videos on Christianity. I looked him up again recently and was so happy to see that he had made a video mocking people who use the term SJW unironically. He got a lot of hate for it, sadly. Do you think eventually YouTube atheism will go through a detox of sorts? That is, will the good atheists on YouTube who support the goals of feminism, social justice, etc. ever outnumber the assholes? My hope is maybe they already do, but it sure seems like the assholes have a huge stronghold on YouTube these days. Well, like you, I would like to think that the non-assholes outnumber the assholes, but the reason that the assholes are so loud and so in control is because YouTube creates an environment where it's easier to succeed and prosper on YouTube if you are a piece of shit than if you are an ethical person who tries to do good work and tries to minimize abuse and harassment. I hate to sound like a broken record. I feel like I say this a lot, but the problem is YouTube's problem, and it's ultimately up to YouTube to address it. Look at what happened last week with ContraPoints. ContraPoints put up an excellent, wonderful, funny, creative, well-shot, well-performed video about freedom of speech that was taken down within a matter of hours because of bogus mass flagging. There was nothing, as far as I could see in that video, that violated terms of service, that violated anybody's copyright, that violated any community guidelines, and yet it was supposedly taken down for violating the spam and deceptive practices policy, which was a total trumped-up horseshit charge. But the video was taken down. Meanwhile, there are people with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of subscribers who make thousands of dollars a month on ad revenue and Patreon pledges based on their YouTube accounts, who do nothing but troll and harass and abuse and blatantly violate community guidelines and terms of service over and over and over again. People who should not even have YouTube channels at this point, who should have lost, not just have a strike, not just lose a video here and there, but who should not have channels, period, because they are such gross, repeated violators of the terms of service and the community guidelines. And yet, they suffer not a bit. They don't get flagged. They don't have to take videos down, or very, very rarely do they have to take videos down. They don't get suspended. They don't get banned. They suffer no consequences whatsoever, despite being gross serial violators of community guidelines and terms of service. Adam Rainstopper. Steve, I have a, this time maybe not so dark question. I ask mainly because I have considered myself pro-feminist, anti-racist, gay-friendly, immigrant-friendly, and so on since I was maybe 10, until I realized 7 or 8 years ago that I was, to some extent, guilty of almost every kind of casual, subtle prejudice and bigotry that I had chastised others for all my life, and that the only way to be truly anti-racist and pro-feminist and LGBT-friendly, etc., was to be willing to seek out and confront bigotry wherever I found it, including in my own psyche, and to swallow my pride and let others point things out to me about me. As a straight, cis white male raised in the US, do you think it is ever practically possible to wake up one day and realize that the journey to enlightenment is over and you or I have become 100% not racist, sexist, whateverist, or whatever else phobic? Or should we accept that, at least for those of us born before the turn of the century, it is a perpetual journey, that we will forever be works in progress? We will forever be works in progress. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing either. It's just the nature of the thing. That's just the way it works. There will never be a time when you or I or anyone reaches maximum enlightenment, you know, where you hit the ceiling and you're like, I am as self-aware and as empathetic and as informed and as free from bias and prejudice and intolerance as I can possibly be. I'm pure now. It's never going to happen. But you can always be better. And the reason you want to be better isn't so that you can reach some arbitrary standard and say, hey, I got an A on the test. It's because you care about people and because you want to be better for other people. You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. You don't want to harm people physically. You don't want to contribute to patterns or attitudes or reinforce systems that harm people, that hold people back, that oppress people, that tell people they're less than other people. You don't want to be a part of that. Not because you just want to be right and not wrong, but because you care about people. You want to make the world a better place, or at least you want to stop contributing personally to making the world a worse place. But yeah, you'll never cross the finish line. You'll never be done. But that's okay. It shouldn't be daunting. That shouldn't be frustrating. That shouldn't be discouraging. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of the thing. That's the nature of life. You'll never be finished, but you can always get further along. There you go. Samuel Sturgill. Is it impossible for a nerdy guy like me to get a hot chick? I changed my profile pic so you can get an idea about what I look like, and I have been dieting and exercising to help look more handsome. What should really matter isn't how I think you look or how any other person thinks you look, but how you see yourself. I know that that's really corny advice, and it's been just trotted out again and again and again. It's very cliche, but I think it's true. I think you would be very well served, both in terms of your future romantic prospects and just for your own character and your own development and maturation as a person, to try to not look at it in terms of I have to get handsome, I have to get in shape so I can get a hot chick. I think you do a great disservice to yourself and to other people when you view things in those terms. Now, can you work on stuff? Sure. Can you work on being nicer? Can you work on being more polite? Can you work on being more confident? Can you work on being less awkward in social situations? There's all kinds of technical stuff, and there's all kinds of things that you can do to make yourself better able to relate to people. Yes, of course. But the bottom of it is, be yourself. Don't be afraid to fearlessly be yourself and to reach out to other people and hope that you find someone who is genuinely attracted to you, to who you are. Not just because you have the right body type or your hair is the right style or you're wearing the right type of clothes or you say the right things. It's not a trap. You're not trying to trap somebody. You're trying to attract somebody to you, someone who you find attractive, and they find you attractive. Believe me, it can happen. If it can happen for me, it can happen for you. It can happen for pretty much anybody, I would say. David Edwards, I noticed something interesting at the memorial service for my former pastor. During the preaching time, they made it seem like being an atheist is not just a lack of the belief, but would be disrespecting the life of this good man. They also made the point that such a belief would make it seem like you were condemning this man and themselves as a fool. Naturally, I never said anything, but was really struck that just by lack of belief, I was ridiculing him and his family. I would never want to do that, but fear if they ever found me out, this would be their attitude toward me. Have you run into this? I've never experienced that, but I do remember some years ago when an acquaintance of ours died, and my father went to the funeral, and I didn't go to the funeral because I wasn't super close to the person, and plus I just avoid funerals at all costs anyway. But my dad went to their funeral, and when he came back, he was talking about it, and he described that there was a point during the funeral service where the pastor who was conducting the service basically went into like a religious sermon, and almost, the way Dad described it, stopped just that much short of doing an altar call. I mean, making it like a full-on church service at this person's funeral. And that really put my dad off. My dad is not an atheist. My dad is not as hostile toward religion or as sort of ambivalent toward religion as I am. I mean, he believes in God. He even believes in some form of Christianity. But he felt that that was almost profane to do that at someone's funeral, to take something that was that should have been a sanctified moment for everybody there. You're grieving the loss of this person who must have meant something to you, or you wouldn't have come to the funeral. It should be about grief. It should be about sadness and togetherness and community and about each other and the deceased. And instead, it was used as an occasion to give basically the religious equivalent of a stump speech. It's similar to what you're describing, and it's inappropriate, I think, for the same reason. You know, it's just wrong to take someone's funeral as an occasion to do something like that, I think. You know, and I'm sorry that happened, and I'm sorry that you were made to feel bad for just sitting there as an atheist. You know, made to feel like you had somehow betrayed the memory of the person that you had come to memorialize. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. Speaking of terrible, in a completely different way, in a more irreverent way, it's now time for
the lightning round.
Still not time for a coherent segue, obviously. Anyway, ahoy Yerno. I made a bet to read Ulysses by the end of this year as an English lit major. What's your opinion on the book, and how fucked am I? I actually have never read Ulysses. I have read Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. I read that in college, and I really liked that a lot. I really, really liked Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, I should say. But that's the only Joyce I've ever read. I have not read Ulysses, so I can't advise you. I'm told by people who would know that it's a very difficult book, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. Lots of difficult things are incredibly rewarding if you give them the time and attention that they need. So I would recommend that you go for it. Dive right in. Troubleshooter 125, lightning round / white room questions, Steve. Ellen Ripley, Wonder Woman, choose. Ellen Ripley. I'm going with Ripley. Nothing against Wonder Woman, but I'm going with Ripley. Ripley's one of my favorite protagonists, period. Female, male, whatever. Gotta go with Ripley. Nifetif, whatever you pronounce that as. I really am sorry that I'm butchering that, I'm sure. Anyway, is there a reason other than your dialect that you say folks instead of people when referring to different groups, like black folks instead of black people? Is people considered un-PC in any way? I don't think it's considered un-PC or insensitive or anything like that. A part of it is my dialect, it's just the way I talk. I'm used to saying folks or folk or whatever. But also, I mean, I have seen that modeled by other people. Some of my teachers and role models in social justice activism do refer to, for instance, trans folk instead of trans people, queer folk instead of queer people, etc., black folk instead of black people. So I've seen that form used before, and I've sort of adopted it on my own. I do sometimes say people, you know, instead of folk, but I guess I prefer folk because it seems a little more informal, it's a little less clinical, it's a little folksier, if you might say. So it's some combination of the two. It's a combination of perceiving it as being a little bit easier or more sensitive, and also just lining up with the way I naturally talk. Camel spider attack. What a vividly horrifying username. Hey Steve, are there any writers considered classics or notables of literature whose work you actually hate, or at least consider wildly overrated? I, for example, cannot abide Henry Miller, William Faulkner, or fucking Robert Heinlein. Ugh. Any similar literary antipathies? Oh, Tolkien. Tolkien's a big one for me. I mean, I wouldn't say I hate Tolkien or really anybody, but ambivalent, not caring about, thinking that his work is grossly overrated and overread. Yeah, I would put Tolkien at the top of my list. C.S. Lewis too, even though C.S. Lewis wrote my favorite of the Atheist Reads series books that I have ever done, Mere Christianity. That was definitely the best of all of those books I've ever done. But in general, I am not a fan of C.S. Lewis's writing. I mean, I don't think he's bad, but it just, like Tolkien, it just doesn't speak to me. It doesn't do anything for me. I read it and I think, what is the big fucking deal with this? So those two are the big ones for me. And also Jane Austen. I've just never gotten it. You know what I mean? Same deal. Like I don't have any antipathy towards it. I don't hate it. I just don't get it. It doesn't reach out and grab me like it does a lot of other people. So there you go. Zacchaeus 4, Twin Peaks The Return, yes or no? Yes, I'm actually really enjoying it so far. I understand why someone who was hoping for something that would pick up right where the old show left off might be disappointed or dismayed or be getting impatient with it or whatever, but I really like it so far. I really like it so far. It's very Lynchian. It's like David Lynch doing a TV series without the network over his shoulder saying, okay, but it has to be at least this coherent. You know, he's basically been able to do whatever he wants. And I have found it very interesting so far. I'm looking forward to where it's going. So it's a big yes for me so far. Kevin Logan, so there is a general election here in the UK. Has it made the news at all in America? Yes, it has. In fact, today, as I'm shooting this video, is your election day over there. So tomorrow, when this video goes up, the election will be over. So fingers crossed for Labour. Hopefully that won't be incredibly sad for you to watch, Kevin, and my other Labour voting friends in the UK. But yeah, it is. We are paying a lot of attention to it. We're paying more attention to Trump and Comey and the hearings, the Senate hearings with former FBI Director Comey talking about all those times that Donald Trump tried to obstruct justice. But yes, the UK general election is getting a lot of attention here as well. And I am personally very, very vicariously invested in it. Rob Adams, following on from Der Wunderbar's question last week, have you seen The Grave of the Fireflies? If not, well, you should, at least once. If you have, did it make you wail like a tiny child the way it did with me? I didn't wail like a tiny child, but it was very moving. Yes, I have seen it. It's one of the saddest, most beautiful movies I've ever seen. Absolutely. Didn't actually make me physically cry, but it was so, so beautiful and so moving. Definitely. Great movie. John Brockman, my two cats are getting older, each 16 years old. Every time I think about them dying, I get a little sick. Do you have any plans, ceremonies, or the like in mind when your fur baby kicks it? I honestly have no idea what I'm going to do with mine. Well, neither do I, John. We're in the same boat. I haven't really thought about it at all in terms of specifics. I have a general idea what I'm going to do because I remember what we did when my dog passed away. I know like the place to call that in this area that makes funeral arrangements for pets, or makes the arrangements to bury your pet or cremate them or whatever you choose to do. I know who to call, but in terms of specifics, like I have no idea. I haven't really thought about it. I probably won't until the time comes. So right there with you, buddy. Tom McDonald, Steve, I was wondering if you have ever gone camping, real camping, in a tent in the woods, away from RVs and such. Was camping something your family did when you were young? We never really went camping when I was young, but as an adult, I've gone several times, and I wish I went more. I love going camping, like with a tent in the woods. There are several areas around where I live that are really good camping areas, and it's been about 10 years, maybe even longer, since we went camping, but I would love to go again. I feel like I should make the time to go because I really enjoy it, and I'm the same way. I mean, camping in an RV or going and renting a cabin is great, but you know, tent in the woods, you know, build a fire, cook some apples and potatoes, and I mean, over the fire, you know, like a can of beans, or go fishing or something. You know what I mean? Like I love that. I've done that a few times. Too few times really in my life. It's always been a blast. I should do it again. Thanks for the reminder that I don't do that enough. Harry Ray, in the wake of Kofifi, it occurred to me that Trump has actually been far more incompetent than I expected. I was expecting a George W. Bush type administration. Stupid president surrounded by a competent administration enacting hateful right-wing policy. But I'm almost impressed at the depth of incompetence across the board with Trump's administration. Thoughts? I think it's more of, with me, it's more a case of being dismayed at how fully my worst fears have been realized. It's not that I can't say I'm surprised. I can't say that he's more incompetent than I thought he would be. He's exactly as incompetent as I was afraid he would be. And that is dismaying and disappointing in its own way. So that's where I'm at with it. You know, I didn't expect George W. Bush. I actually thought that it would be worse than George W. Bush. But I'm disappointed to see that it is exactly as bad as I was afraid it would be. And on that happy note, that's it for the questions. It's time now for the shout out. As I said last week, this is June. This is Pride Month. So all of my shout outs this week will have something to do with being advocates or activists for LGBTQ plus causes. And this week, the shout out goes to Keshet. Keshet is an organization that is dedicated to achieving equality for LGBTQ plus people in the Jewish community. Once again, as I mentioned last week with my shout out for an organization that focuses on LGBTQ plus people within the black community, Keshet focuses on LGBTQ plus people within the Jewish community who are a minority in a minority, who not only have to deal with being marginalized in our society in general, but also have to deal with particular anti-gay, anti-trans attitudes in Jewish communities, which in some cases are very, very conservative and very orthodox. So Keshet is an organization for those folks, for people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, etc. in the Jewish community, to make sure that they have the help that they need, that they have a place they can go to reach out and to advocate for equality and fairness and justice and tolerance for LGBTQ plus people in Jewish communities. Keshet. Check it out. It's an awesome, awesome organization. I also want to remind you, as I always do at this time, to check out the Lemme Listen family of podcasts. These are podcasts that are created by my very good friend, Jason Harding, aka Jason with a D, the puppet master of Opinionville. There's a whole bunch of awesome Lemme Listen podcasts, but the one you really need to focus on for this week, for this show, for these few moments, is Late Seating, which is the movie review podcast, the belated movie review podcast that Jason co-hosts with me, where we take a classic film that has a reputation for either being great or being terrible. We give it a fresh review. We look at it and we decide for ourselves whether it deserves whatever its reputation is, whether that reputation is good or bad. This week you can listen to our brand new episode of Late Seating, which is our review of the first film of what turned out to be the biggest movie franchise ever, The Fast and the Furious. You can you can listen to our review of the original movie, The Fast and the Furious, starring Paul Walker, Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, a bunch of other people are in it too. It's a very famous, very successful movie that spawned a whole big old franchise. You can listen to our review of that movie and all of the past episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the excellent Lemme Listen podcasts by going to LemmeListenPodcast.com. That's it, everybody. I'm out of here. Once again, I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until then, take care, everybody. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron of this channel. Thanks again ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.